June 6, 1944. While the world focused on Normandy, another battle, small, silent, and almost unknown, was unfolding in the black water off Tai in the Sulu Sea. A lone American submarine, USS Harder, drifted beneath the surface, its crew exhausted from weeks of stalking Japanese convoys. Inside the control room, sweat dripped from every face. Men whispered, instruments hummed, and Commander Samuel Dealey, a calm, sharp-eyed officer with a reputation for impossible risks, held his binoculars against the periscope. Then he saw them, 3 Japanese destroyers, slicing across the water in a tight formation, engines roaring, depth charges already primed. These ships weren't escorting a convoy. They were hunting Harder specifically. They had been searching for hours. Any textbook said Harder's next move was obvious. Go deep, run silent, disappear. But Dealey stayed at periscope depth. To most submarine commanders, a destroyer was the one opponent you never challenged directly. It carried sonar, speed, armor, and one brutal advantage: the ability to turn the ocean into a pressure cooker of exploding steel. A destroyer meant death. 3-minute annihilation. Yet something in the destroyer's movement caught Dealey's eye. Not confidence, but caution. Hesitation. The Japanese captains were scanning the horizon, expecting Harder to flee. Dealey lowered the periscope. All ahead flank. Bring her to attack course. We're going straight in. Silence fell across the sub. Every man on board froze. Charging a destroyer head-on was considered madness. A suicide move. Every manual, every instructor, every war patrol report warned against it. But Dealey understood something the textbooks didn't. When a submarine behaves in a way the enemy doesn't expect, the enemy hesitates, just long enough. Harder lurched forward, engines roaring, the steel hull vibrating as she sprinted toward the oncoming destroyers. In that instant, a new kind of submarine warfare was born, not based on stealth but on shock. The crew braced themselves. The destroyers closed in, and Dealey prepared to fire the shot that would change the Pacific submarine campaign forever. Harder knifed forward through the dark water, rising just enough for Dealey to keep the enemy destroyers in view. The range was closing faster than any man aboard had ever experienced in training. Submarines weren't built for this. They weren't supposed to charge anything. Every instinct in the crew screamed to dive, to disappear, to save themselves. But Dealey had already made his calculation. Destroyers were designed to chase submarines. Their sonar worked best when the target was retreating, presenting a long underwater profile. But when a submarine drove straight at them, the sonar return was confused, almost indistinct, forcing the destroyer captain to rely on eyesight alone. And in the broken morning light of the Sulu Sea, vision was far from reliable. Dealey's voice cut through the control room. Set torpedoes to high speed. Bow tubes 1 through 4 ready. A torpedo man whispered, "Sir, range is suicide." Dealey didn't answer. He watched the lead destroyer through the periscope. The Minazuki, a veteran ship that had sunk submarines before. Its bow wave grew larger, the ship accelerating, expecting Harder to dive at any moment. But the Japanese captain hesitated. Submarines never behaved like this. Was Harder crippled? Out of control? Luring them? That single moment of doubt was all Dealey needed. Angle on the bow 0, fire 1. The Harder bucked as the first torpedo launched. Another followed, then another. Inside the Minazuki, alarms erupted. Their spotters saw the white wakes too late. The destroyers swerved hard to starboard, but the angle was impossible. At 900 yards, point blank for submarines, the torpedoes slammed into the destroyer's hull. A blast of water shot skyward. Harder trembled as the shock wave passed. Through the periscope, Dealey tracked the destroyer rolling to port, fire venting from beneath its forward turret. It wasn't just hit, it was finished. The crew erupted in a mix of disbelief and adrenaline. They had survived a head-on charge against a fully armed destroyer. Dealey didn't celebrate. He wiped the periscope lens, scanning for the remaining 2 destroyers. "They'll come for us," the exec muttered. Dealey nodded. "Good. Let them." This wasn't luck. This was the tactic, unofficial, unwritten, and he was about to prove it again. The sea boiled with debris from the shattered Minazuki. Smoke drifted across the surface, mixing with the morning haze. Harder cut back to periscope depth, the crew tense, every man listening to the sonar operator's trembling updates. Multiple screws fast closing. Of course they were. The remaining Japanese destroyers, Hyanami and Urikase, were not retreating. They were accelerating, furious, determined to avenge their sister ship. Destroyer crews were taught that submarines were cowards of the deep. They struck from hiding and fled at the first sign of danger. But what they had just witnessed shattered that belief. They weren't chasing a fleeing submarine. They were chasing an attacker, one who might strike again. Contact bearing Green 15, range decreasing, sonar reported. Second destroyer following same track. They're coming right at us. Dealey didn't flinch. He studied the water's movement through the periscope, searching for wake patterns, estimating speed. Most submarine skippers would have already gone deep, hoping to evade the inevitable counterattack. Depth charges at close range could fold a submarine's hull like a tin can. But Dealey had learned something crucial during earlier patrols. Destroyer captains hated uncertainty. When their target did something irrational, their reaction slowed. They second-guessed. They waited for confirmation instead of firing instantly. Harder would exploit that hesitation. Again. "Helm, bring us around. Prepare for another direct approach." The exec blinked. "We're charging a second destroyer? We're not giving them the initiative," Dealey said calmly. "Not today." Harder's electric motors hummed as she swung toward the oncoming threat. The distance shrank rapidly. The control room felt like it was shrinking too. Men standing rigid, breath shallow, hands gripping steel railings slick with sweat. Up in the periscope eyepiece, the bow of the next destroyer grew larger, sharper. Dealey saw sailors running across its deck, scrambling to man guns, shouting to each other. They expected Harder to dive. They were waiting for her silhouette to vanish beneath the waves. Dealey stayed right where he was. "Bow tubes reloaded?" he asked. "3 ready, sir." "Good. We'll only need 1. He raised the periscope again, lined up the shot, and whispered, almost to himself, "They think we're the prey." Harder surged forward. The second duel of the day had begun. The destroyer's bow wave towered like a wall of white water through the periscope lens. It was charging in full fury, engines throttled up so hard that smoke poured from its stacks. This time, the Japanese captain wasn't hesitating. The moment Harder appeared on his scopes, he committed to a kill run, straight down the submarine's throat. But Dealey had already anticipated this reaction. "Range?" he asked. 1,300 yards and closing fast. Too far for a reliable shot. Too close for comfort. Harder's crew braced as depth charge racks appeared on the destroyer's stern, glinting in the sun. The urge to dive was primal. One pull of a lever could take Harder into the deep, where the submarine belonged. But diving now would give the destroyer exactly what it expected, a fleeing target. Instead, Dealey held the periscope steady. "Come on, come a little closer." The exec gripped a bulkhead. "Sir, if we wait too long." "We won't." At 1,000 yards, the destroyer fired the first salvo, white plumes erupting from its guns. Shells screamed overhead, crashing into the sea just yards from Harder's wake. The concussion rattled the submarine, knocking several men off balance. 700 yards, sonar shouted. The destroyer was almost on top of them. Dealey exhaled once, slow, precise, controlled. Fire tube 2. The torpedo hissed out of Harder's bow. Unlike the first attack, Dealey did not fire spread. He wanted a single torpedo on a predictable course, impossible to dodge at this range. A head-on torpedo attack gave the target almost zero lateral room to maneuver. If the aim was true, the destroyer would run straight into the warhead. "Hard right rudder," Dealey ordered. "Take us down 10 feet. Hold depth." He wasn't running. He was clearing the line of impact. Through the periscope, he watched the torpedo streak toward the destroyer, an invisible threat beneath the waves. The destroyer captain saw the wake and reacted instantly. The ship heeled over, engines screaming as the helm swung hard to port. Too late. A bright flash erupted beneath the destroyer's bow. A massive column of water burst skyward, followed by a roar that reverberated through Harder's hull. The enemy ship lurched violently, nose dipping, metal twisting. "She's breaking up," someone shouted. Dealey didn't look away until the destroyer rolled onto its side, its propellers still spinning in the air before vanishing beneath the surface. 2 destroyers, both sunk in direct charges, and it was still the morning of June 6th. The ocean went quiet again, but wouldn't stay quiet for long, because the Japanese Navy was about to call in reinforcements, and Dealey was nowhere near finished. By midday, the Sulu Sea had transformed from a hunting ground into a graveyard. 2 Japanese destroyers lay at the bottom, their sinking witnessed, though not yet believed, by patrol aircraft and distant lookout posts. Within hours, word spread across the Japanese fleet. A single American submarine is attacking destroyers head-on. The claims sounded impossible. Propaganda, surely. Yet the reports kept coming, and the Japanese knew one thing for certain. A submarine was somewhere near Taui, and it was killing frontline warships with alarming precision. So they tightened the net. From the anchorage at Taui, from nearby escort groups, from patrol lines farther west, destroyers were ordered to converge on Harder's suspected position. The Japanese weren't going to let one submarine embarrass them a third time. Deep inside Harder, the air grew hotter, thicker. Men's faces were streaked with sweat and oil. They had barely finished reloading the forward tubes when sonar called out again. Fast screws, multiple contacts, bearing 340. The exec stared at Dealey. "More destroyers?" "Likely," Dealey muttered. "They're hunting us." He didn't sound surprised. What Harder had done in the morning guaranteed retaliation. But what the Japanese didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that Harder had not stumbled into these engagements. Dealey was deliberately stalking the hunting groups. Japanese destroyers around Taui were constantly rotating between anchorage and patrol. Dealey had studied their patterns. He knew how long it took for them to refuel, how long their sonar sweeps typically lasted, how aggressively they pursued sonar pings. And now they were reacting exactly as he hoped, moving individually or in pairs, following fragments of sightings, racing to engage an enemy they barely understood, that made them vulnerable. "Captain," sonar said, voice cracking, bearing steady, closing. "I count at least 2, maybe 3. Harder's crew tensed. 2 enemies had been terrifying. 3 would be catastrophic. Dealey didn't hesitate. "Bring us up." Periscope depth. The sub rose slowly, water sliding off its hull. Dealey lifted the periscope and scanned the horizon. There, white bow waves. 3 distinct tracks, approaching in a staggered formation. They weren't coordinated. They were rushing, scattered, impatient. "Same mistake," Dealey whispered. "They think we're hiding." He lowered the scope. "We attack the lead ship. Direct approach. Same as before." The exec blinked hard. "Sir." 3 destroyers at once. Dealey tightened his jaw. "They're counting on fear. If we run, they win." He turned back to the crew. "If we strike first, they break." Every man aboard Harder felt it. The fear, the disbelief, the thrill. Harder came about, bow turning toward the lead destroyer. Once again, the hunted submarine became the hunter, and the battle for June 7th was about to begin. Harder surged ahead, engines humming at a controlled flank speed. The crew had stopped questioning Dealey's decisions, not because they weren't terrified, but because the impossible had already happened twice. The ocean outside felt charged, almost electric, as if the sea itself were waiting to see whether Harder's luck or brilliance would run out. "Range to lead contact?" Dealey asked. 20 to 100 yards. Still closing. Dealey scanned again. The formation was sloppy, 3 destroyers rushing in without coordinating their search patterns. That alone told him everything he needed. They weren't hunting with discipline. They were hunting with anger, and anger made them predictable. "Helm, adjust course 2 degrees starboard. Keep her steady." The control room was silent, except for the low murmur of machines. Torpedo men stood ready at the bow. Men clutched railings. Even the air felt tight. Through the periscope, Dealey watched the lead destroyer throw itself forward, pushing an oversized bow wave. It wasn't zigzagging. It wasn't probing with caution. It was charging, relying on spotting a periscope feather or catching a sonar echo off a fleeing submarine. They still couldn't comprehend that Harder wasn't fleeing. Dealey lowered the scope. They're committing too early. They're assuming we're diving. They'll be right on top of us, the exec said. Barely any time to shoot. Exactly, Dealey replied. That's why we hold. The distance shrank. 1,800 yards. 1,500. 1,200. Inside the destroyer, spotters would now be shouting coordinates. Sonar operators would be straining to detect a sub going deep. Every man on that ship expected the engagement to unfold one way. Harder wasn't following the script. Fire control, stand by, Dealey said softly. At 1,000 yards, the destroyer opened fire. The first salvo landed short, geysers of water exploding around Harder's bow. The second landed closer, too close. The submarine shook under the impact. "Captain," sonar yelled. "The second destroyer is accelerating, flanking to intercept." Dealey remained calm. "We finished the lead ship before they box us in." He lifted the periscope again. The destroyer filled the lens. He could see crewmen on deck. He could see the barrels of the forward guns recoiling. This was the moment. Angle on the bow 0. Fire 1. The torpedo shot forward, a streak of death beneath the waves. Fire 2. A second torpedo followed. Dealey watched the destroyer try to dodge. Rudder slamming over, engines roaring, but its speed worked against it. It overcorrected. The bow swung wide. Too late. The first torpedo struck midships. A fireball erupted, followed by a deep, thunderous crack. The destroyer shuddered violently, its deck pitching as flames tore through the superstructure. A cheer almost erupted in Harder's control room, but then sonar interrupted. Second destroyer, bearing 180, closing fast. Dealey didn't smile. Good. We're not done. The third kill was seconds away, but now Harder would have to survive the counterattack. The ocean detonated around Harder. Shells from the second destroyer crashed into the water, throwing towering plumes across the bow. The submarine rocked violently as Dealey kept her at periscope depth, dangerously exposed, but necessary if you want a firing solution. "Captain, they're coming in hot. Range 800 yards. Harder had never faced a destroyer this close, this fast, immediately after firing. The crew could feel the vibrations rising through the steel hull, the rhythmic thunder of high-speed screws driving straight toward them. "Dive?" the exec asked, voice cracking despite himself. Dealey gripped the periscope handles. No, they expect that. He wasn't being reckless. He was being consistent. Every destroyer Harder had faced so far had hesitated at the last second because the submarine didn't behave like a submarine. The Japanese captains were reacting to a pattern, a frightening, confusing pattern. To break that now would return the advantage to them. Dealey kept Harder level. Steady as she goes. Helm, come 5 degrees port, just enough to unmask tube 3. The destroyer loomed closer through the periscope lens. Bow churning water into sheets of white spray, guns firing non-stop, muzzle flashes lighting the bridge. Harder was moments from being rammed or blasted apart. "Torpedo room," the exec shouted. "Ready on tube 3. A beat. Tube 3 ready." Dealey didn't blink. Fire 3. The third torpedo leapt from Harder's bow, disappearing into the churned water. If the destroyer captain spotted the wake, he had maybe 2 seconds to react. But reaction required calm. Something none of the attacking ships had shown so far. On the destroyer's bridge, spotters screamed warnings. The ship tried to turn, engines screaming, smoke pouring from the stacks. But it was too close, moving too fast, committed to the charge. Dealey lowered the periscope and braced. A violent explosion tore through the water. The submarine shook so hard that several crewmen lost their footing. The lights flickered. Metal groaned. Then stability returned. "Hit!" sonar shouted. "Massive hit." "She's breaking apart." Dealey raised the periscope again. The destroyer's bow was gone, just gone, replaced by a geyser of flame and steel debris. The entire forward third of the ship sank in seconds. Sailors scrambled aft, but the listing was too steep. The ship rolled and vanished beneath a boiling patch of sea. 3 destroyers. 2 days. All killed in attacks that every naval manual declared suicide. But the sea didn't rest. New contact, sonar suddenly barked. Bearing 260. High-speed screws, closing fast. The 4th destroyer had arrived. And this one wasn't charging blindly. It was approaching silently, cautiously, learning. For the first time, Harder faced a destroyer captain who wasn't confused or enraged. He was prepared. For the first time since June 6th, Dealey didn't immediately recognize the destroyer's behavior. No frantic engine surges. No reckless zigzags. No hasty gunfire. The new contact approached at a deliberate, almost ghost-like pace, closing the distance without revealing its intentions. Sonar's voice dropped to a nervous whisper. "Captain, this one's different." Dealey already knew. The Japanese had finally sent a hunter who wasn't driven by rage. One who had studied the sudden disappearances of 3 destroyers and decided not to repeat their mistakes. "Maintain depth," Dealey ordered. "Hold speed." Harder slid silently beneath the waves. The tension on board was suffocating. Crewmen exchanged glances in the dim red lighting, aware that this captain, whoever he was not going to charge straight into Harder's firing arc. He was probing, learning. "Range to contact?" Dealey asked. 2,900 yards, steady. The exec stepped closer. "Sir, if he keeps that distance, we can't close for a shot." Dealey didn't answer immediately. Through the periscope lens, he saw the destroyer moving slowly, maintaining a cautious offset angle. Its guns remained silent. Spotters scanned the horizon with discipline rather than desperation. This captain knew exactly how Dealey had killed the others. He wasn't going to repeat their mistakes. Dealey exhaled. "He's trying to bait us into diving. And if we do?" The exec asked. "He'll pin us with sonar and call in more ships. What if we stay up?" Dealey allowed a faint smile. "Then he'll keep waiting." It had become a duel of patience. Harder held depth. The destroyer held distance. The ocean, strangely quiet after so much violence, felt like a vast chessboard, and both commanders were calculating their next move. Minutes passed, then 10, then 20. Sweat pooled on the control room deck. Men grew tense, muscles aching from remaining still. The enemy captain refused to blink. "He believes he can outweight us," Dealey thought. But submarines had limits: battery, air, torpedoes, crew endurance. The destroyer didn't share those limits. He could wait all day. Dealey finally spoke. "Helm, begin a slow turn to port. 1/3 speed." The exec hissed. "Sir, we're giving him our side." "That's dangerous." Dealey nodded. "Yes, and he'll think we're preparing to run. That's what I want." Harder inched into its turn. Through the periscope, Dealey saw the destroyer shift its posture, just slightly. Engine spooled up, its bow angled in, ready to close the trap. "There we go," Dealey whispered. "He's committing." The destroyer accelerated, carefully but decisively, believing Harder had finally broken pattern. It was moving into attack posture. "Now," Dealey said. "Helm, reverse the turn. Bring us directly toward him." Gasps erupted in the control room. Harder lunged back into a head-on alignment. The destroyer captain realized the trick, but too late. He had given Harder the angle she needed, and Dealey was ready to deliver the 4th blow. Harder steadied on her new course, slicing directly toward the destroyer. The sudden reversal stunned even her own crew, men bracing against consoles, eyes wide, sweat streaking grime across their faces. Every instinct they had told them this shouldn't work a 4th time. But Dealey's instincts had carried them this far. "Range?" he asked quietly. 1,800 yards, closing. Through the periscope, the destroyer surged forward, but not recklessly. Its captain stayed disciplined, adjusting his course with careful, measured turns, trying to maintain a favorable bearing. He had realized Harder wasn't fleeing. He was now trying to maneuver into a position where he could ram or rake her with gunfire before she could fire a clean shot. He's smart, the exec muttered. He's not giving us a perfect angle. Dealey nodded. He doesn't need to. We only need a moment. The destroyer shifted again, tightening its arc. This was the danger of a skilled enemy. He forced you to create your own openings. Helm, Dealey said, 5 degrees starboard. Short burst at flank. The sub lurched. Men clutched railings. The brief surge of speed bought Harder a new angle, just enough to force the destroyer to correct its approach. That correction created a narrow window, barely seconds long. Dealey saw it. Angle on the bow. 2 degrees. Fire 1. The torpedo streaked away. The destroyer reacted instantly. Rudder over, engines roaring. A perfect counter. A perfect evasion. That one's going to miss, the exec breathed. Dealey didn't argue, because he wasn't done. Fire 2. A second torpedo launched, but Dealey had aimed it not at where the destroyer was heading, but where it would be after its evasive maneuver. It was a shot only someone who truly understood enemy psychology and reaction time could take. The first torpedo passed harmlessly astern of the destroyer. The enemy captain likely believed he had outsmarted the infamous Harder at last. Then the second torpedo struck. A massive explosion erupted beneath the destroyer's engineering spaces. Flames burst from the stacks, followed by a deafening roar that shook the entire sea. The ship instantly lost speed, its stern dropping into the water. Men on deck scrambled as it took on a terrifying list. "She's done," sonar said in awe. Dealey watched until the destroyer rolled, hesitated like a dying animal, then slipped beneath the surface. For destroyers down. But Harder's nightmare wasn't over. "Captain," sonar barked. "Contact! New contact!" Large screws, closing from the west. "Fast!" Dealey lowered the periscope slowly. Another destroyer. This one wasn't rushing in. It was moving with purpose, with confidence, almost as if it had been waiting. Dealey exhaled. They've sent a veteran. The control room fell silent as the new contact closed in. No one needed sonar to explain the danger. The sound of the incoming screws was different, deeper, more deliberate, not the frantic thrashing of younger captains chasing vengeance. This destroyer moved like it had nothing to prove. Range 3,000 yards, sonar said. Speed steady. No zigzag. Dealey raised the periscope. The destroyer advanced with quiet confidence, holding a perfect intercept angle. Its bow cut a clean line through the sea. No wasted motion, no hesitation. This was no inexperienced escort captain. This was someone who had survived submarine attacks before. Someone who understood patience. Dealey spoke low, mostly to himself. He knows we're here, and he knows how we fight. The exec swallowed. "Sir, maybe this is the one we avoid." Dealey didn't look away. "If we dive now, he'll pin us. Then call in the rest." The destroyer was closing, but not committing. Closing just enough to keep pressure, then adjusting, watching, analyzing. It was the polar opposite of the first 4 kills. No anger, no ego, just cold professionalism. A true hunter. Harder's crew sensed it too. The excitement of the earlier victories felt distant now. This enemy wasn't making mistakes. He wasn't reacting. He was studying. Range 2,600, sonar continued. "He's holding position." Dealey frowned. "He's waiting for us to move." That was the realization that chilled even him. Every previous kill had relied on shock and disruption. Harder refusing to behave like a submarine, Japanese skippers losing precious seconds to confusion. But this captain, he wasn't confused. He was letting Harder make the first mistake. Dealey lowered the periscope and rubbed his eyes. He wants us to attack. He wants to observe the angle, the speed, the tactic. If we don't, the exec asked, he'll close and slowly box us in, force a dive, then pound us until we break. Both choices were traps. Harder held depth. The destroyer held distance. The stalemate stretched on, 1 minute, then another, then 5. Sweat dripped onto the navigation table. Men breathed shallow, trying not to disturb the air. Dealey finally broke the silence. He's disciplined, but discipline has a pattern. The crew stared. Dealey leaned over the chart table. He's maintaining a fixed offset on our bow. Same position for 5 minutes. That means he's locking us into his sonar cone, so he knows our exact bearing, the exec said quietly. Yes, Dealey replied, but he's assuming we don't know his. A small, dangerous smile crossed his face. He thinks he has control. The exec blinked. Sir, are we charging him? No, Dealey straightened. We're going to make him think we're charging him. A ripple of fear moved through the room. Helm, Dealey ordered, come right sharp. Flank for 5 seconds, then back to 1/3. The submarine jolted into motion. Above the waves, the destroyer reacted instantly, accelerating, shifting angle, preparing for the expected attack. Dealey watched through the periscope, waiting, watching, not for the destroyer's movement, but for the captain's next mistake. And when it appeared, he whispered, "There it is." Harder had found the opening she needed. Harder surged forward once again, bow slicing silently toward the veteran destroyer. The slight maneuver had provoked a subtle overcorrection. The enemy captain, confident in his reading of Dealey, had adjusted the ship's course, just enough to open a narrow, firing window. Angle on the bow, 0, Dealey whispered. Fire 1. The torpedo left the tube and raced through the water. The destroyer's bow rose slightly, momentarily masking its propellers. Dealey held the periscope steady, counting every second as if he could delay time itself. 2. Fire 2, he said immediately. The second torpedo streaked in tandem, aimed ahead of the destroyer's predicted path. The first torpedo struck the hull amidships, shaking the ocean with a deafening roar. Flames erupted, smoke spiraled into the sky, and the deck crew scrambled helplessly. The second torpedo hit moments later, dead center. The destroyer convulsed violently, a massive plume of water and fire shooting upward, metal tearing. Harder's hull shuddered with the force, yet the sub remained intact, barely submerged in the boiling wake. Target destroyed, sonar reported in awe. All 4 destroyers confirmed sunk. The control room erupted, not in celebration, but in stunned relief. 4 enemy destroyers, sunk in 4 days, using tactics that defied every conventional rule of submarine warfare. Dealey didn't speak. He simply lowered the periscope and exhaled. Around him, the crew absorbed the magnitude of what had just happened. They had survived what no textbook, no instructor, and no other submarine captain had dared attempt. Above water, the Sulu Sea calmed. Smoke trailed from burning wrecks, marking the graveyards of ships once feared by the Pacific Fleet. Word would later spread among submariners. A new tactic had emerged. Not one found in manuals, not one taught in school, but one forged in instinct, psychology, and audacity. Dealey looked over the crew, seeing faces pale but proud. Men who had doubted, feared, and questioned were now bound by the shared memory of survival and mastery. Each man had learned something profound that day. In warfare, understanding the enemy's mind could be as deadly as understanding weapons. The USS Harder had rewritten the rules, and the tactic Dealey pioneered, asterisk charging down the throat instead of fleeing, would ripple through the Pacific submarine force, saving lives and changing naval doctrine for years to come. The sea held its breath, as if acknowledging that a new kind of submarine captain had emerged, one who understood that courage, psychology, and timing could turn the hunted into the hunter. By June 10th, 1944, the story of USS Harder's patrol had begun to circulate quietly among American submarine crews. Word traveled not through formal channels. No training manuals had yet captured Dealey's methods, but through whispered accounts, letters home, and debriefings after patrols. Submarine captains, long trained to avoid engagement at all costs, now had a living example of audacity paired with precision. The down-the-throat tactic, as it would later be known, was simple in concept but profound in execution. Instead of fleeing the hunter, confront it head-on, exploit its hesitation, and turn fear into advantage. Dealey's attacks had demonstrated a truth Navy manuals rarely acknowledged. An enemy commander's psychology could be manipulated just as effectively as a ship's armor or gun caliber. In the months that followed, Other skippers began emulating Dealey. They practiced controlled head-on approaches, using the lessons of tai to their advantage. The Pacific Submarine Force discovered that when used judiciously, aggressive tactics could force Japanese destroyers into mistakes, save lives, and disrupt enemy shipping in ways conventional doctrine never imagined. USS Harder herself became a legend. Reports credited the submarine with sinking 5 destroyers in 4 days. But beyond the numbers, it was the boldness of those attacks that defined her place in naval history. Dealey's name was whispered among submariners as a captain who had seen the rules of war not as constraints, but as challenges to be outsmarted. Yet Dealey's genius lay not in recklessness, but in calculation. Each decision, each torpedo fired, each turn of the helm, was guided by understanding the enemy's expectations and exploiting them. It was a lesson in psychology as much as in tactics. Sometimes the most effective weapon is audacity, combined with careful observation. Even today, nearly a century later, the principles Dealey demonstrated off Tai influence submarine operations worldwide. Modern naval officers study his patrols to understand risk, timing, and the delicate interplay between fear and decision-making in combat. The sea, once silent after those 4 days of terror, carried forward the legacy of a captain who refused to follow the rules, only to write new ones in their place. Commander Samuel Dealey, USS Harder, and the down-the-throat tactic remain a testament to courage, innovation, and the enduring power of human ingenuity in war.